Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Parag Khanna. Parag is founder and managing partner of FutureMap, a data and scenario-based strategy advisory firm. He is the international bestseller author of 6 books. He has traveled to most of the countries in the world, and he holds a PhD from the London School of Economics. And today, we will speak about his latest book, Move, The Forces Uprooting Us. Parag, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Len. Very nice to see you.
So, Parag, I am an economic immigrant. I came from Colombia, South America, to Canada, and sure enough, I have found plenty of opportunity here. I feel like the dream that it was painted to me, uh, it wasn't perfect, but I have achieved everything that I desire to achieve by immigrating to this country. And I see this move going everywhere. People from all over the world are moving to other places where they see more opportunity. So I agree 100% with the premise of your book. But before we get there, I would like to ask you about you. I mean, where do you come from? Where do you live? What is it that interests you about all this geography and demography and all these studies and writings that you share with us?
Well, thank you, Len. I think you and I are both migrants, that's for sure. Economic migrants as well. I was born in India, but my parents had just moved to the United Arab Emirates. So I spent my childhood in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And then for economic reasons, we moved to the United States, to New York. So I spent a fair bit of my upbringing there. I was an exchange student in Germany, came back to the United States. I studied in the US and also in the United Kingdom and in Germany again, but I did my PhD in the UK in London. And I have lived in England, in Geneva, in Berlin, and now in Singapore. So I've been moving a lot over the course of my life. And I think that it's just the way I grew up. My parents really raised me in this way to love, travel and to embrace global experiences. So I've been infected with that passion since before I was even a teenager, really. And my whole life has been lived in the way that I think you would expect, in a way, given how comfortable my parents made the world feel to me.
And okay, so you have taken this broader perspective of the world, but I find I live in Montreal, and we are having constantly clash against English versus French, and we don't expand our mind away from our neighborhoods or from the political party that is in this little block of geographical block. How can we expand our perspective from regional to a global point of view?
Well, they can coexist. I don't think that the local should disappear in the global. Montreal is actually emerging as increasingly a global city with great universities, attracting talent, issuing visas to talented people from all over the world to come and take up residency specifically in Montreal. It's encouraging international organizations to relocate their headquarters to Montreal. All of that is happening while you are still fighting these intense local linguistic battles in every city block and school board and local election. So clearly, Montreal can be a place that is intensely and fervently local while also being increasingly global at the same time. So we should not view these as opposing forces. Local pride in one's identity and heritage does not mean that one is a tribal savage at the same time. And this is the mistake that people make when they denounce the independence movements of Catalonia and of Scotland. These are some of the most globalized people in the world. Look at the Scottish diaspora. Look at the contributions of the Catalans to global navigation and trade and commerce. So, these people are anything but. Think of the Venetians. The Venetians have also been pursuing independence from Italy. They want to have a Republic of Veneto. But does that mean they're tribal? I mean, far from it, right? What would Italy have become in terms of its global role if not for the Venetians? So we can go on and on, in terms of this, but in my worldview, it is important to consider oneself, as I do, a citizen of everywhere, someone who is trying to identify with the locality, with the place, while still contributing the global identities and experiences that I bring to that place.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for giving me that perspective. You're completely right about that. Well, tell us about your book. How is it that this book came to your mind? Why you feel the urge to write a book about moving and the human displacement?
Well, in a way, human migration is a deep part of our identity. To move is human. To move and to migrate and be nomadic is as intrinsically human as any ethnic, ethnological, ethnographic trait. In fact, we only have the genetic traits that we have and the ethnic traits that we have through migration and mingling and intermarriage and in a way, the very diverse DNA. That sort of, well, we share the same DNA, but the very diverse traits that we have accumulated through the ethnic collisions and the racial collisions that have happened over hundreds of thousands of years. So there's nothing abnormal about this. This is who we are. For me, I wanted to tell that deeper story about how natural it is for humans to have been nomadic and potentially for us to become more nomadic again. Not because we would become nomadic by choice, but because the world is becoming more and more complex. And it could be a political upheaval or conflict that pushes you to move somewhere. It could be that your job is lost when a factory is closed and you're forced to move somewhere in search of work, like most of the economic migrants of the world. It could be that climate change has driven you away from your home. So there are many causes, and I investigate them category by category by category in the book. There are many overlapping and intersecting and reinforcing drivers of human migration. And simply because technology makes it possible. We have built so much connectivity, highways, railways, airports. People can be more mobile. And so I investigate all of the causes and effects and enablers. And I come to the conclusion that over the coming century, this century, it could be that more than 1 billion people will move and relocate. And that would be fairly consistent with the historical trend, which is that in every century, the number of migrants is increasing from millions to tens of millions to hundreds of millions in the 20th century, and in this century, perhaps billions.
Well, yes, you say that to move is human, and of course, you are giving us a historic perspective from the point of view that at one time, before the agricultural revolution and industrial revolutions, we were nomads. But didn't the agricultural revolution and industrial revolution kind of make us more sedentary, and only a small minority of people will move from one place to another?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, when we say a small minority, it's actually a very large number of people numerically. The percentage of the world population that has crossed borders, right, is rising. The percentage of the number of people who live outside of their country of origin is growing significantly. For example, in 2019, 1.5 billion people crossed borders in 1 year. That was the highest number ever in history. Nearly 300 million people are like you and me. We live in a different country from the one that we were born in. Again, that's a record number. So that's the trajectory that we are on. Now, that is not a small, insignificant percentage of the population. That's not just the rich, people with 5 passports and, homes in different countries. The vast majority of people who have relocated have been like you and me, lower class, lower middle class, whatever the case may be, middle class economic migrants in search of opportunity. And that's a very significant number of people. And I hope that the number grows, because I encourage, in the book, I argue that it would be better for people to relocate to places with greater opportunity, of course, but it would also be better for the countries that they are going to accept them.
Okay, so a person looking for better or economic opportunities like myself, who migrated from Colombia to Canada, I can, of course, anyone can understand my motivation, but many of these countries, industrialized modern countries, they prefer to have people who already have skills, who already have some kind of work experience, or what will happen to all those people who are desperately needing or looking for a better place, but they don't have the skills to be welcome?
Well, not all migration is restricted to skilled migration. In the United States, there's a very large number of unskilled migrants who come, obviously. Canada has a large immigration program, probably per capita, the largest immigration program in the whole world, mostly skilled migrants. But all countries actually need a balance of skilled and unskilled labor. If you look at Italy today, the garbage is not being collected because they're not importing enough unskilled labor, semi-skilled labor, to be trash collectors. Italians don't want to do it. In Britain, they have a shortage of farmers. Whenever they have a harvest in England, and in Britain, agriculture is thriving because of climate change, is actually helping the agriculture in Britain. But they can't convince enough British people to actually become farmers. So we have shortages everywhere of unskilled labor as well as skilled labor. And the only way to alleviate that shortage is through greater immigration.
Okay, how about reverse migration? Okay, let me put this in perspective. One of the most popular episodes that I have in my podcast is this woman who is from California, and with her pension she couldn't afford to live in California. So instead of moving to another state in the United States, she lives now in Mexico, and she says her pension check goes a long way and she lives comfortably. So a person who maybe is living now out of their pension but cannot afford to live in San Francisco, New York, or Los Angeles, what would be a good place for those people to live and live comfortably?
I have a whole chapter of the book exactly about people like your friend, and people who never thought they would leave America or leave Europe. Now that they can get their pension payment digitally to their bank wherever they are moving. They're more likely to move because they expect to live longer because our longevity has improved. But everything has become more expensive, so they need to find a cheaper place. So they're going to Panama or Costa Rica, Mexico. They're going to the Dominican Republic. They're going to Bali. They're going to Phuket. All sorts of places. So even elderly people are even retiring on cruise ships, because you can bounce around from one cruise ship to another cruise ship and literally live cheaper than if you were living on land. And these cruise ships are now adapting to have medical facilities. So I write about all of these things. So I don't want to prescribe one place. There are many options. There's a menu, livable places for people, depending on what your circumstances are, what your budget is, what kind of weather you're looking for, and so forth. But the important thing to remember is that it is a big, wide open world. There are many countries that will accept you wherever you're from, and whatever your sort of, skills that you bring, and that you should be looking out for those opportunities. Even though now I want to mention young people. Before the pandemic, there were only maybe 2 countries that had nomad visas, right? But today, 75 countries have nomad visas, where they basically say, if you're a young person and you're a digital worker, come and live in our country, come and live here, stay as long as you like, just, rent an apartment, stay in Airbnb, do whatever you want, basically, because these countries are realizing that they don't have enough young people and they need consumers in order to have a thriving, vibrant services economy. And so that's the new trend.
I never heard of this nomad visa. Can you mention some of those countries?
Oh, I mean, like I said, it's now half the countries in the world
Wow.
have these programs where they're saying, just come apply, you can have a visa on arrival, you can stay indefinitely, you can convert your nomad visa into an entrepreneur visa, technology visa, residence visa, business visa, whatever the case may be. And maybe in many of these countries eventually become a citizen if you like. Dubai or the United Arab Emirates has something called a golden visa that they're giving out also to young, talented people. I focus a lot in this book on youth because I'm writing about the future. I'm writing about the next 10, 20, 30 years. So, of course, the people who will be alive and will dominate the world in the next 10, 20, 30 years are today's young people. So I noticed that young people identify much more readily with their generation globally and are much more mobile and willing to travel and move because they are actually less likely to have children and they're less likely to own a home than the previous generation. So if young people don't have children and don't own homes, what is stopping them from traveling? What is stopping them from moving? Nothing is.
That's exactly what I have done. I sold my property, and my only property is my laptop and my phone, and I'm ready, and my passport. I'm ready to go wherever. But okay, so ready to go wherever, and all these countries are opening the door to the digital nomad. Um, what is becoming the lingua franca of all these digital nomads? Is English going to eventually be the lingua franca of everyone, or do we have other competing languages as well?
Well, I don't know, but not everyone, but definitely the default language. I mean, it already is for North America. It already is, in a way, the interesting thing is Europe, because in the 1990s, people were debating whether Spanish or French, or sorry, German or French, would dominate the diplomatic interactions in the European Union. But when a French person, an Italian person, and a Romanian person, and a Portuguese person get together in Brussels, guess what? The only common language is English. And so you do see English in many ways as a de facto global, standard. And I really don't think that there's any competitor to that. And I don't think that there will be any competitor to that.
Okay, how about ethnicity? As far as I see from demographic trends, the white people in the United States are rapidly becoming a minority. Is that trend going to continue? And if so, what will happen to the identity of the white people in the United States?
Well, for the white people to no longer be a majority, but to still be the largest group, that is the trend that is happening. And eventually all other groups together might outnumber white people, and that will take, the next couple of decades. But it's a gradual process that's been underway for some time. So I don't think that it should be characterized in such dire terms. America is a land of immigrants. The complexion of the society, the demographic, racial, ethnic composition of America has been evolving in very large leaps, in various periods over the last 200 plus years because of large scale Irish and Italian immigration, then Latino immigration, now Asian immigration. So you have, this evolving diversity in America. And I think that to think of America as being white people dominate and everyone else is subordinate is obviously no longer going to work. You have to think of America as being first and foremost the diverse place, and then looking at the common interests and common national identity and patriotic identity that emerges, that is common denominator among all of those people. That's going to be the more progressive way to understand the sort of meaning of American identity in the future, rather than thinking about it as being defined by one group and imposed on the other groups.
Right. How about countries like Japan, who is dying off? Basically, their population is becoming older and older, yet they don't want to open the doors to immigrants.
Well, right now there are countries that are still very xenophobic, and populist, and you see that in Europe primarily. But one should not generalize and say that all Western countries are becoming, or have become xenophobic and populist, because that's not true. Because Canada is not like that. Germany is not like that. England, even after Brexit, is not like that. Today, it's easier to migrate to England than it was before Brexit, because they've realized that they have these terrible labor shortages and need to import people in order to meet those shortages. So there is not one common Western perspective. There are many countries, even in the West, that are becoming much more pragmatic about immigration issues. And I think that because of the labor shortages and the aging population, eventually all countries are going to engage in this war for young talent. Rather than rejecting migrants, they will race to embrace them.
Right, but in the case of Japan, I think they are preferring to have robots with artificial intelligence rather than immigrants.
Well, I would say it's both, really. What it is that, yes, in a country like Japan, you have automation and technology, but that's because it is, of course, a place that is, that is very thoroughly saturated with technology. But in fact, they also have a lot of immigration. There are now 3 million foreigners living in Japan, and that has never happened before. So the truth is that Japan is doing both, because they realize that robots do not care very well for old people, So what I have learned in the course of this research is that we should look at what countries do, not what their leaders say. The leaders may say, we don't want any immigrants and so forth, but what are they actually doing? And if you look at Japan, if you look at Russia, we think of Russia as a very racist, country and society. But look at what they're doing. They're actually letting in more and more and more migrants, because they actually have a significant shortage of workers.
Wow. Well, I tell you, Parag, this book is expanding my mind. It's helping me get out of my little neighborhood in Montreal and see the universe with different eyes. Can you tell us one more time the title of the book, and where can the listeners follow the work that you do?
Sure. Well, this book is called Move, The Forces Uprooting Us. It was published this year by Simon & Schuster in the United States and Canada, and other publishers around the world. And you can learn more about it at paragkhanna.com, PARAGKHANNA.
Parag, thank you so much for your time.
Such a pleasure, Alan. Very nice to see you. Thank you.